Hello, David. Thank you for being here with us. It's great to have you with us to talk about AI and boards. To get the conversation started, how would you define machine learning and how would you define AI? And does it matter how you define them?
The way I look at it is that machine learning allows us to learn from large amounts of complex data, and AI systems then use machine learning as techniques to really make human-like decisions with some form of autonomy. At least that's the goal. And so, I always bring up this point which many people disagree with, but I think it's actually true. Is there are only a handful of AI applications, real AI applications, or applications that exhibit some form of AI out there in the world right now. We see them in finance, but we also see them in the world of autonomous driving and some medical applications. But in the end, it's a hugely overhyped term, and it comes down to some very fundamental technologies and methods that we use to build machines that ultimately, that's the goal, right? To build systems that can make human-like decisions with some form of autonomy.
So does it matter how you define them, or is it kind of a continuum?
It's a good question. I would say it's more, well, let me answer the question the following way. I think it's important that we understand what sort of technologies we are using. So, we need to understand the risks and also the opportunities that AI as a whole brings to companies, individuals, societies. Ultimately, when we build systems, as I defined it, that are supposed to make human-like decisions with autonomy, what we are talking about are applications that are, bringing opportunities, but also some risks to the table. So it's important that we can trust the decisions that the systems are making while it's operating. And I mentioned before that, AI is this whole field of many different things. I mean, Alan Turing defined that, about 70 years ago from right now. And the more important bit is that we understand what are the specific technologies that we are using. So if we look at machine learning, which is one of the subfields of artificial intelligence, it's important to understand what sort of data are we using, and what sort of data is the system learning from. Do we have any bias in there? And ultimately understand that the systems are no magic. If we focus on machine learning or deep learning, in the end, I mean, we've created tools that allow us to process huge amounts of data, and much more so than in previous times. And so machine learning, as an example, is just a toolbox to extract juice from data. And I think it's really a nice illustrative example. It's what we are getting is the juice from the data, and we need to make sure that that juice is correct. And to answer your question, it's probably, we can come up with all sorts of definitions. I think the more important bit is that we understand what are the risks and the opportunities that the technologies bring, and how they apply in the given operating conditions.
Thank you. And why is it a hype now?
Well, I think I mentioned some of that. I think in the end, we have seen a massive increase in resources. This is both on the computational side, but also on the data side. We're in a position where we can create much more complex models. I mean, if we look at finance, statistical models or data science has been used for a long time. We look at hidden Markov models or autoregressive models. It's a long list, but really, we've been able to build ever more complex models that are now summarized under the whole deep learning umbrella with massive neural networks. And that comes with computational demands. Now, fortunately, these last couple of years, or even these last 2 decades, we've seen that we can process both the models, but then also the increasing data demands. And so what we've seen is that with these complex models operating on large amounts of data, we can create extremely complex mappings that are used to make what I would call complex decisions. And you know, that I think we've seen many applications where AI on its own can act and make even superior decisions to humans. But for sure, you know, the combination of human intelligence and artificial intelligence, I think that's also very interesting. So I've seen the report from the CFA Institute, for example, on the investment professional of the future, which was, I believe, released last year. And there they talk a lot about artificial intelligence and human intelligence combined. And I think this is really where super interesting stuff can happen. But it comes down to that we now have the tools to process much larger amounts of data and build more complex model. And you know, with that complexity, we also need to make sure that we are doing the right things.
Let's go way up to the board level. How are boards deciding on issues that relate to AI, and are the boards equipped to decide on these issues?
So I think what we generally see is that there are different types of companies. Generally speaking, we understand though that you know, it's often difficult for senior managers and executives and board members to understand the full implications of these AI technologies. And really, you know, if we go from an executive perspective, it is dangerous to rely on experts who rely on experts who rely on experts who then have, you know, a machine learning engineer that executes, you know, their job. And I think what we see a current trend where boards take in external advisors and consultants to provide some insights, but you know, the truth is that sort of coming from my last answer is that these systems are extremely involved and need extremely careful design, depending on the application. We are talking about high stakes applications here with a risk of significant financial loss, or even beyond that. And the technology landscape is becoming more and more complex. You know, we see new machine learning approaches being created every single day at an academic level, then they are being introduced in industry. And it's already today, it's very hard, even for a machine learning engineer, to keep up with all the technologies and methods out there. Now we extrapolate to the board, you know, I think it's fair to say that generally there's a lack of a thorough understanding of the technologies that are actually used in their implications. And you know, this will become even more important or even more prevalent as we see that companies have more pressure to improve their products and improve their services over the next couple of years. And as artificial intelligence as a whole is getting better, it'll be easier to introduce them in sort of industry applications. Now, the interesting thing here is that I say this somewhat lightheartedly, but everyone can build an 80% accurate machine learning model, you know, or even 95% with the right metric. But if you have millions and millions at stake, you know, that's not enough. So it takes a lot of work and may even be impossible to bridge the remaining, you know, percent to get to the performance that we require for critical applications. And this ultimately, you know, there needs to be oversight from the board. The direction needs to be given by the board on, you know, what's the risk that we can take. It goes all the way to you know, can we afford that risk? And that needs to be ultimately assessed and mitigated. And I think for that, companies can only do themselves a favor and understand what sort of technologies are being used in their products and services.
Thank you. Do you see any solutions for this?
Well, I guess the obvious solution is that, given the financial, ethical, and other implications, companies should ensure that senior management and the board have a sufficient understanding of artificial intelligence, all the related technologies used in business to, I guess, provide the oversight and guidance that the company as a whole needs. And I think the question that we have to ask ourselves is if we have the appropriate skills and expertise to oversee the risks and opportunities that we've talked about over the next couple of years. And here, what I always say is, people don't. I mean, it seems to be this massive magical field of, only the computer scientists can roam around and do things, but really, I think it doesn't come down to, senior executives sitting down and building ML models, machine learning models themselves, but really understand the terminology at a high level, and the importance of having good data sets, the significance of analyzing for bias in data sets, and more generally the opportunities arising from AI technologies. So it really doesn't come down to becoming a hardcore machine learning engineer or anything like that. I think going through a process of dealing with introductory material on the machine learning or AI side and understanding how that applies to their company or to their industry or to their role. I think learning the language around, learning a bit of the language that technical people out there are using, I think that gives you a significant leverage in your role, as part of the board or as a senior manager, to just listen into these conversations and understand what do people actually mean when they talk about, imbalanced data sets and how they evaluate their models, and provide that guidance and oversight, because, in the end, everyone is just doing their job. And I don't think we can expect from the machine learning engineer to have the company's vision as a whole on their radar. So I think understanding the language, understanding the risks and the opportunities, not necessarily in that order, that gives you great leverage to actually influence the strategy for AI, machine learning, and it actually allows people to also see opportunities. So you will, with an understanding of what can be done and what cannot be done, I think you're in a much better position to understand where in your company or in your organization AI can make a difference and where it can't, because it's not the magic one-size-fits-all tool, and that will just give you a much better ground for making good and informed decisions.
Thank you. Just touching on that little nerve of the distance between the board and the machine learning engineer. And in many, especially large organizations, there's a lot of people in between. Does information, and with information, I mean small concepts at inception that grow if taken to a larger scale, does that get lost from the engineer to the board? Because executives tend to need to aggregate and select information and then take it to the next level.
I guess there's always noise, and we all know Chinese whispers, and everyone has their own goals and motivations, and a machine learning engineer gets certain requirements that they have to execute upon, and then you have mid-level management who have their goals to fulfill, and they will sell the underlying technology in a way that they want to sell it. And I guess first of all, there's a shortcut, but I'm not sure. More importantly, it's important to have an awareness of the risks and make sure they're communicated back to back. Now, I think the shortcut is to position, and going back to this article by the CFA Institute, which I recently read, which is why it's so present. I think they say it so well, and it's it's upskilling. It's understanding the technology landscape and the language that is being used. If you are a senior manager, yes, you do need to aggregate, and you do need to make decisions based on abstract pieces of information. But I think your reach or your level of understanding is so much better if you understand the basic terminology, the basic concepts. And I just go back to use these words, the risks and the opportunities of these systems, because it's so true. And I think it's much less likely that if you have a company that understands how to use data and understands how to sort of massage this in the right way, from the machine learning engineer to the executive, obviously at different on different levels and with different depth of knowledge. But if you have a common terminology that you can use across, communication also becomes so much easier, not only more robust, so you have not only less noise, but it also becomes so much easier. And even if the board decides to get an expert on to, make sure they don't walk off in the wrong direction, that's cool. And I think that's, even encouraged. But even talking to that expert will just be, a much more fruitful exercise if the terminology is right. So, I can only say again that these systems, the systems that we will see being introduced over the next 5 to 10 years, will need extremely careful design and consideration. And we need to be able to communicate about them in an intelligent manner.
Thank you, David. Thank you for a very insightful conversation.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.